together. Adoption brings our worlds together. Adoption brings our worlds together. Come and share with me. Adoption brings our worlds together. Adoption brings our worlds together. Adoption brings our worlds together. Come and share with me. Share with me.
Hello, and welcome to the Journey to Josiah podcast. I am your host, David D. Marshall, CEO and founder of Journey to Josiah Incorporated. On today's show, I have with me an amazing guest, a very, very special guest. Why? Because she is my cousin. And she is, in my own opinion, maybe I'm partial, a trailblazer. Her name is Crystal Travis. She is the CEO and founder of World of Surrogacy. So you're going to hear a lot about the world of surrogacy. You're going to hear Crystal's own backstory. Crystal has a wonderful backstory of her own. So there are going to be many dimensions to what we get from Crystal today. Crystal, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, David.
You're most welcome. You're most welcome. So, I want to dig right on into it. As I said, we are cousins. And the unique part of this, the special part of this is, as our guests know, maybe they know, I'm an adoptive parent. So my whole world centers around the world of adoption and fostering. And you actually were, we'll say, but you'll explain it more. You'll go into more of the fundamentals, adopted by my great aunt and great uncle. And why I find that so significant is they were, Aunt Edna and Uncle Ted were born in 1908, both of them, right?
I think Daddy was 1908 and Mommy was 1913.
Oh, she was 13?
I think 1913. Yeah.
Wow. All right. See, I didn't realize that. And so already our guests hear something very significant in that, because we're talking about Black folks that were born 1908 and 1913. So I've kind of given a little backstory that just kind of just throws everything right on out there. So tell me a little bit about your story.
So my story began, my birth parents, not my birth parents, my adoptive parents, as I always call them. They wanted to have a family. My father had been married previously and had a son. My mother was not able to have children, or I found out later in life why she didn't. They wanted to have children, so we lived in the state of New York. They had contacted social services. Our birth parents, there were 4 of us at that time. My birth father was somewhere in Jersey. My birth mother was in Peekskill, New York, and she abandoned us on the Hudson River.
Now, when you say on the Hudson River, just for clarity from me, because even some of this, while we've had conversation, obviously, there are even some details that I don't really know. So when you say the Hudson, was this literally?
Yeah, we were on an apartment on the Hudson.
Okay.
In Peekskill, and she abandoned the 4 of us. And we were found, or I forgot the name of it. It's not like BG&E. I don't remember the name.
Con Edison in New York.
Con Edison, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They called in to the police department because they had seen us for a couple of weeks in the window with no adult supervision.
Wow. So individuals, employees of Con Edison saw you all in the window, and you said for how long again?
2 weeks.
For 2 weeks. And there was no adult that they saw present. Let me ask you, in that time, how old were you?
I was 3. My sister Robin was in kindergarten, so she was 5, 6. And then Michael was 4. Lorraine, the youngest, was 7 months. And what we were told was that our sister Robin tried to care for us at that point, that we were eating paint chips off because there was a lot of sugar in that. But there wasn't like food left. So by the time we were found, we had bellies and weren't in the best condition. I have no memory of it. But my sister Robin remembers a lot of the stories because we were too young to understand. And Michael understands many of the stories too.
And tell me, how old was Robin again?
She was 5.5.
She was 5.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. That's a lot to take in because, again, that's not a conversation that we have like that level of detail. Whew, okay. All right. I have to process that for a second. And so there's 2 weeks, and you had 2 weeks of trying to survive with paint chips. And so when the Con Edison staffers found you, they then contacted social services in New York?
They contacted the police.
The police.
Yeah. And then the police got social services involved. And then social services, they moved the 3 of us to another foster home. I'm not certain where Lorraine went at that point.
Okay. So the 3 older children, and then you were in one home and then a baby. And you think that maybe it's because someone wasn't comfortable with the baby?
She may not, the foster home, she may not have at first wanted to deal with all of the 4 siblings.
Okay.
I'm told eventually that Lorraine did come. But the first foster home that we were in, even as infants, it was an abusive situation. So they had to take us out of that. And then my parents, initially there were 3 of us that they took. And I remember my mom always saying that we would say to her, "We want you to get our baby sister." And so eventually they went and they got Lorraine. So all 4 of us could be together.
Wow. So initially when you were placed with Aunt Edna and Uncle Ted, it was just the 3 of you.
Yes.
And then you all told them about Lorraine. Yeah. How long were you with them prior to Lorraine coming to join you all?
I don't know. I don't think it wasn't like a year. It wasn't an extended period of time. It was probably a matter of a few months. And New York State allowed my parents to take in all 4 of us.
And do you remember how old you were when you were placed with Aunt Edna and Uncle Ted?
I was definitely 3 because my mother said that I couldn't say 3. I would say 3 years old.
Oh, yes. I love it. That's what Aunt Edna told you?
Yeah.
3 years old.
Yeah. So
those things I just love. Like I think about Josiah he didn't call me daddy. It was daddin. And I just wanted to keep that. I was so sad when he stopped saying that. So it's those things we remember with our children, with those cute little terms. 3.
So I was probably like 2.5 by the time, that we were abandoned, because I was 3 by the time I had just turned 3 by the time my parents took us in.
You just turned 3. Wow. And so eventually Lorraine came. And so then it was the 4 of you all. I hesitate and well, you know what? I'm not going to go back and relitigate something else prior to them. And when I say to them, to Uncle Ted, not Edna. So tell me a bit about life with Aunt Edna and Uncle Ted.
So, for many years they worked in New York City, and at some point they decided that they wanted out of the city, and they had this business in upstate New York where they had houses that people would rent the houses on weekends. My parents would cook because my mom, she cooked in New York. And she was known for her baking and her cooking because at one point she cooked for Irving Berlin. You may be too young to know who that is.
I've heard that name.
But his songs are still very, very prevalent. And so my mom had that business and my dad had a job. My mom's business did pretty well, so we had help. For my mom had helped for all of the kids. And it was like a pretty normal kind of childhood. I think for my parents back then, I remember my sister Robin saying that she would often want to share stories of what had happened to us with our biological family, and my parents would shush her. Because back then, I think that people really didn't necessarily understand the trauma that was associated with an event like that. And the social workers really didn't necessarily talk about it. The social workers' jobs really at that time was to make sure that the children are in a safe place, that you're going to school, you had food and clothing. They didn't look at the mental aspect of it. Like, we never went to a psychiatrist or anything, given the trauma that had happened.
And, it's interesting as I think about the foster care system. Now, I can even remember as a child myself, and there being children in the neighborhood that were in the foster care system. And I always, it seemed that quality of care, I'll say, that was very, very different than what is now very much the requirement for right now. And so I can see where some of the situations that happened in the past would have been probably a lot more excessive, I would say, possibly, than even now, because the vetting process for individuals who wanted to become foster parents was obviously very, very different then than right now. I want to ask you a question because we've had this discussion a little bit. How old were Aunt Edna and Uncle Ted when you all came to live with them?
That's funny. They were older. I think Mommy was 52 or 53,
Wow.
and Daddy was older than that. I believe he was 7 years older than than Daddy. But I remember my mom saying that people thought they were crazy, that they would just say to them, like, really, what are you doing? They had the means to do it. And it's something that they wanted to do. We were very lucky that 4 children were placed with parents who loved them as their own.
Yeah. Who really, really wanted them.
Yep.
Did they ever talk to you about their desire to be parents? I don't even know if really the whole adoption thing had entered into their mind, but did they ever tell you, or did you ever ask? Because you probably would have had to ask versus somebody volunteering that of that generation. Yeah. Did you ever talk to them about that?
We talked about it a lot because I remember, when you're that young and you think that a parent is coming back. So the social workers would tell my mother, like, there were times when our birth mother would say that she would meet us, and she never, ever showed up. So at some point, the social workers just stopped completely being in touch or trying to figure out where she was. They felt like it was too detrimental. My parents always wanted to make the adoption final. They could never find our birth parents to sign off on the adoptive process. So that's why the state really let my parents handle it however they wanted to handle it. They came around, they knew we were fine. Eventually, they pretty much stopped coming around because they knew that we were in a safe place.
And that goes to show the difference in where we are, even technically, because a lot of that, because of technology, is now able to be avoided, we'll say. Then, obviously, there was no level of technology. If somebody just kind of went on about their business, you really didn't have a way of trying to, or being able to find them. So you said that life there, you said you had a great life. It sounds like you had somewhat of a privileged life. Yeah? Because you said Edna had help.
Mom, we had help. But my mother would always say, you guys are my help too.
Right.
but we did have help. We had a live-in, and my parents on the weekend she would go back to the city. My parents would drop her at Greyhound, but she was there during the week.
That is
To help.
amazing to me.
Yeah.
Just hearing that. And again, I'm fascinated on two levels. One, because we're talking about Black people of a certain generation, right? That were able to pull themselves up in that way and live that kind of life. And then I'm also fascinated still in that there was that thought process of, we want to be parents, so we will then become adoptive parents. Because that, in that day and time, as we know, seemed to be more of a white heterosexual thing. And I just put that part into it. As guests know, I work in the world of LGBTQ adoption. But in the early days, we had white heterosexual families doing this. Black families, that just was not the norm. Do you happen to know at all what prompted them to go that route?
To adopt
Yes.
or to get into foster care?
Yeah, because I'm assuming then their whole, unlike now we specify. Well,
Right.
I'm sure they specified then too.
Right.
You know, do I want to just foster or do I want to foster to adopt? So I'm assuming clearly they wanted to adopt. It was just some other technical things that kept them from being able to finalize. But do you know exactly what prompted them to want to be adoptive
I
parents?
didn't learn that until close to my mother's death when we had a conversation. I don't want to cry.
It's all right. You can.
My father, he had a son through his first marriage.
Mm-hmm.
My mother told me that was her second marriage. She told me that my father had syphilis and she didn't want to bring children into the world.
Wow. No, you don't have to pause. Are you okay? Do you want to pause at all? Sure.
Okay.
Wow. That's a lot.
A lot of things come out of people's deathbed.
Mm-hmm.
So there were things as a kid that you don't understand. But they both wanted to have a family.
Mm-hmm. And so they clearly fought to make sure that they could.
Yeah.
They found a way.
Yep.
And I think even in this kind of moment here, I think the moment that people need to know is that where there is a will, there is a way.
Yep.
And when you want something bad enough, you will figure it out.
Yep.
And they, in a time where adoption was not common, they put aside other things and they said, you know what? We can now be a blessing to other children that really, as an adoptive parent, we don't see our children, even if we've adopted them, as they're just ours.
Of course.
That's just it.
Yeah.
And so the joy that you all brought them, and I'm sure the healing, because obviously that would have been traumatizing to them.
Yes.
So you all brought healing to them.
I'm sure to each other. The other thing is that we were raised like in a white environment too. Mm-hmm. So we were the only Black family for a long time. So, you know, the white community, there was a lot that they didn't know. They just knew that, but they're these older parents, but we don't really necessarily know the whole backdrop. People just, I guess, assume that we were adopted. Others didn't know because they would be like, oh, your kids look like you.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And I get that with Josiah too. You know, that's the Black thing, right? Because we all look alike.
Well, I get that with my daughter who looks white. They're like, oh, it looks like you. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, no, with features, no matter what, the complexion that doesn't shift anything.
Right.
Wow. So you said earlier on that with things that had happened, you all you didn't go into therapy. Now, that was really because that wasn't a talked about thing in that time, yeah?
Correct.
And obviously, well, based on what you said, I don't want to say obviously, social workers did not think in that realm of the traumatic toll that this would have.
Correct. I mean, I'm 60 years old now. So today, it's very, very different when people talk about the trauma that has happened. We're quick to say, like, we can put something in place. Back then, it wasn't really talked about. Or like if if somebody has ADD or someone it gets agitated quickly, there are meds for it. It's just a different sort of world. It's a different sort of world where people they weren't really clued in. I think that maybe the thought process, maybe even for social workers, was well, these 4 kids are lucky because they're placed somewhere and they're all together. And that was sort of it.
Yeah. Have you later in life for yourself gone into therapy to discuss some of the things some of the traumas there?
Of course, because it's trauma that for me that I didn't recognize, but you will have trauma, you will have abandonment issues, whether or not you were old enough to process that or not. Or, I did go into therapy because I often thought, even though I've ended up doing surrogacy, I often thought, well, maybe I waited so long because I was afraid that maybe I wouldn't be a good mother. All of these things are trapped in your head because of answers of things that weren't answered for you, that will never be really answered for you. So it has, different things have different impact. It impacts you in different ways that you don't even think or you don't even recognize.
Right. And wow, you took us to another space, even though it's totally fine because when we talk about adoption and we talk about fostering, as you said, there are many layers of trauma, but the layers as you said, basically you wouldn't even know until maybe you're confronted with a situation. So, I mean, you were married, you wanted to have children, but then there was this pause because of your own childhood, and it made you feel in some way that maybe you could not carry this out. Is that what you're kind of saying? Or tell me, I don't want to put words in.
I didn't feel like I couldn't carry it out. I had, by the time I had gotten married and, thought about surrogacy, I have met some of my some of the birth family. And, that's not always, that can work to good or it could work to whatever. Let's just put it this way. I wasn't that enamored with the biological family. So I thought, well, I don't know, if I have a child, will they be like that? And do I want to go down that road? Because I wanted something very, very positive, and I sort of internalized some of the things that I saw that I didn't want any part of.
Wow. Based on your own experience in that,
meeting some,
yeah. Okay.
And meeting my biological birth mother. I knew that I would never be a parent like that, but you still can't help but think of that. I'm sure my siblings, they've had that thought process too, because that's only normal, that you want to make sure if you bring children in that you do better.
Yes. Yeah, that should always be the thought process, that we want to give them a little better, a lot better than what we had. Wow. I want to go backwards in something, and you might have alluded. It sounds like you always, well, not always, but pretty much you always knew that you had been adopted.
Yes.
And as we think about it now, in terms of even with myself and Josiah, there's always while he's heard the word, but at 5 does not understand it. And for me, there is the very real fear of when he does understand, what will he feel? And how do I, as his parent, help? Because, you're a mom. We always want to take our children's pains away. And there are some that we can't. And I segue, I asked that kind of in bringing Josiah in, but you all seem to always know. Am I correct?
Yes, my parents were very, very clear. We knew, and social workers would come, but they were very, very clear that we had other birth parents, that we were abandoned, but they were mommy and daddy. That's all we knew. That's all we know. Those are the only memories I have of parents. So, but I get what you're saying, because in my circumstance growing up, I'm sure, and I think I can speak for my siblings as well, is that at some point, even though you can have the best home, your mind goes back to like, well, why would someone abandon me? Yeah, you will go there. And the older you get, you begin to understand a lot of things in life. And for me, the abandonment, my parents abandoning us, was the best thing the best thing that happened to all of us.
Wow.
It was the best thing that happened to all of us.
That's a very profound and remarkable thing to say. I don't know that many people would have that thought. That's
I mean, you have to call a spade a spade.
Yeah.
I mean, I met my birth mother. She's deceased now. She died during COVID, but her life always remained not very good. She had many other children, many troubled. It was the best thing that she could have done, was to walk away.
Did you given that you got to meet your birth mom, did you ever get to have that kind of conversation with her? Or was it just something that you were like, I don't need to go there?
Yeah, I tried, but I knew that she would never be able to give me the closure that I needed.
Yeah.
So when I decided that I wanted the closure, I went to her and I told her that I wanted to say goodbye to her on my terms, that I wanted to close that chapter out.
Let me ask you this kind of question, and you've kind of already said it, but I want to dig into it a little bit more. So you said that basically you had an amazing life, and that was the best thing that she could have done for you. A lot of times in this work that I do, there are other adoptees who don't view adoption in the way that you do as an adoptee, and certainly in the way that I do as an adoptive parent, because of the traumas there. What is it for you? I'm always nervous. And I feel like I walk on eggshells to a point now, because I always want to make sure that I'm understanding where someone else is coming from. Initially, I'll tell you this. So I would always refer to adoption as a gift. Why did I refer to it as that? Because I'm on the receiving end, right? So when we get a gift, it's something that it's a gift to us. I always wanted to be a dad, and I always knew I was going to be an adoptive dad. Like I said to you earlier, because this was a part of it was not uncommon. Right. It was not abnormal. This is what we did. I saw it on both sides of my family. And when I have said that, when I've referred to it, and again, coming from the parental standpoint, then I've gotten the pushback. And initially I was offended. Initially, I definitely had blocked people, and so you can't tell me what to say and what not to say.
Right.
But then I also have to take into account circumstance, right? So for you, how do you this is going to be maybe a broad question. How do you view adoption? And I think you might have said this to me early on in my work. I believe we had this kind of conversation in terms of what it could look like in terms of adoptees. I feel like there was something, but I don't want to put words in. Tell me.
I think adoption is a good thing. I guess because I had a great experience with it. I wanted to adopt before surrogacy, and we went down that journey. But in Howard County, we couldn't get someone really young. They wanted to give us someone older, and I didn't want a teenager. I feel that every child that's in the system, if they can be adopted into a good home and loved, that is the best thing for people, because I feel like it gives people stability. I've known children who have gone from foster home to foster home who wanted to be adopted. I don't know what else we can do if you have children that need to be placed somewhere. I mean, I don't think that they should be. I mean, we don't have orphanages in the U.S. anymore, but we do have those in other countries.
Yeah.
And, you know, it might sound Pollyanna or whatever, but I feel like children didn't ask to come here. And whatever children are out there, if they can be loved and be in a stable environment, I'm all for it.
What would you say to adoptive parents in terms of how they can best, it's hard, the word is kind of eluding me. How can we best love our children through? Now, and again, that sounds a little different the way I'm saying, because we love our children.
Right.
We love our children. But I guess I term everything I use love for a lot of things. So how can we love our children through that process? Do you get what I'm saying there?
Yeah, I think so. But you mean as if like when things come up or they may start asking you about, do you know anything about our adoptive parents?
Yes.
Or, and it's different because now I know that there are so many open adoptions now, which I'm not for at all. Because I think that often it can,
really,
yeah, I think that sometimes I feel like that wouldn't be fair to the parent. And I think that often it can cause confusion, especially if especially if the biological or birth parents are not in a good place, or it's hit and miss with them.
Wow. Okay.
Sometimes I think that that's not good, but I think that as long as the parent knows that they love that child and they give all that they can, there's nothing more that, there's nothing more that you can ask for.
Yeah.
There's nothing more that you can ask for. And birth, biological parent, it doesn't mean, that's a whole nother Pollyanna thing. I mean, my children are not biologically mine, but they're my children.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're my children.
Absolutely. No, well, it's the bottom line. We're not going to see them any different,
right.
Nor should we. It's just.
And nor should anyone else.
And exactly.
And nor should anyone else.
Exactly. Wow, that's heavy. Thank you for that, because I do often, I felt like sometimes I can't share my joy, but I get it, right? So I want to always be sensitive, and not everybody is going to feel the same way or view it the same way, again, because of circumstance.
Right.
Now, you said you had trauma, obviously, in your biological home and then in a foster home. And still somehow, well, not somehow, you were blessed to be with amazing parents that somehow that love kind of begins to heal a little bit of that pain. Would you say?
Of course it does. I mean, and even though, like, we had great parents, I remember there were times I was I went through a phase where I was doing poetry, and I remember I used to write like poems about like our birth parents, like leaving us and what did they look like and all of that. But then I grew out of that phase.
Wow.
And then when I think it was my brother or my sister, they found our biological parents. I met my birth father once, and I met my birth mother a handful of times. I was nonplussed by all of it because they weren't where they needed to be. And at that point, you understand, and you're like, you were blessed. You were blessed.
Whew.
You were blessed.
And that goes back to your original statement about not being a proponent of open adoption.
Yes. Like if it had been open with our family, it would have been a mess. It would have been a cluster. To me, birth parents who are not where they need to be, they do not need to be involved in their biological children's lives. You don't get to have that. You don't get to screw them up too.
Wow. Whew, that's heavy. And I'll say this, and sometimes I'm, even in my own, I tread lightly with certain things, but I'll say this, it was always my personal dream when it came to adoption to have this open adoption and to have, like, to use your term, Pollyanna, a different kind of Pollyanna. Obviously, to have this big family where everybody's just like, well, how does this all work over here? And at least for the moment, some things are a little different, at least for the moment.
Yes.
And certainly when I reflect, I have amazing reflections. But I do understand that given circumstance, it's probably best given circumstance. Now, well, let me ask you this. So now I'm using the term given circumstance. Are you opposed to it in all, no matter what, or would it be given circumstance for you?
I think given circumstances. I know that before the surrogacy journey started and we wanted to adopt, I remember telling the attorney that for me, for adoption, it would have to be closed.
Okay.
For me, I would not. And probably I felt like I wouldn't be able to handle that, probably given the situation that I came from with my biological parents.
Okay.
And so, that's where that comes from for me.
Yes.
For me. Like, I'm not trying to join another family.
Yeah. Okay.
So
it makes sense. That gives me great clarity.
Yeah.
Because again, I feel like in my position, I think for all of us, we need to always try, we need to hear, we need to understand. And also, I think so many of us are so closed in our own areas and we don't hear others. We don't even care to think of what somebody else may feel, what their experience is and how they've arrived at a certain place. And that's for me very, very important because I'm even saying, as I'm talking to you, it's also helping me in terms of Josiah and how I have certain conversations. Because again, as I say, he's 5, he's heard the word. I'll tell you this though, Crystal, it was very interesting. It was in the spring. I went to read him a book, and it was a children's adoption book. He said to me, I do not like that book. And I was definitely caught off guard by that, very caught off guard. And so I did say, why don't you like it? He said, I just don't like it. And I left it alone. I didn't go any further into that. And so then probably it was maybe a few months after that. And so he's 6 right now. So we're talking, he was solid 5. He was in the back seat when he likes to just arbitrarily have some kind of conversation that might be all the way over to the left side of the highway. And he said, I'm adopted, right? I said, yes, you are. Do you know what that means? And he said, yes. And he said nothing else. And I said nothing else. But I'll tell you some of that. And he's 5. But it always gives me that fear of Did you not like that book because there's something, there's something hurting, you know, when I say, and so I'm getting a lot from listening to your perspective and how it can be viewed. Not everybody's going to feel the same way as an adoptee, but I feel like that's the thing that scares me the most, is that because I hate to go into too much of even personal things, but there are some things that I feel are safe. I remember when I had a conversation with birth parents, and this was not a decision that they came to lightly. And there was the one question that I'll never ever be able to erase from my mind. And that was, how will he know how much we love him? And how will he know that we never wanted to give him up? And so for me, you know, when it comes to Josiah, knowing I do have that, but still, it's just a scary thing because we never know how someone is going to be able to process that.
Correct.
And hearing how you processed is in some way helpful, but it's still scary because that book
scary for everyone.
Me.
You know what? Even when you were sharing that story, it reminded me of like many of my clients that I've had, including myself, who have done surrogacy, and even clients like even with an egg donor, how often for us, we didn't want to tell our children. I grew up with my mother letting us know.
Yeah.
For my own children, even with surrogacy, even though I knew I should like have that conversation, I never did. But then I was always nervous. I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'm like, uh-oh, are they getting ready to ask me something? And then, you know, one day Elle did, and I think I may have shared it with you. She said something at school that they were talking about their birth story. And she said someone asked her what her birth story was. Remember that? And when we finally had that conversation, and she's like, oh, you mean you didn't give birth to me? And I'm like, no. And I explained the surrogate. And I thought there was going to be all of this drama. And all she said was, oh, well, when I grow up, I'm just going to adopt. And she never said anything more about it. That was it.
But it sounds like she almost equated the two, though. Did she?
Well, I don't think she equated the two. I went into like the birds and the bees to where she could understand it and your cycle and all. And she was just like, oh, I'm not doing that. I'm not giving birth. Little kids are.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah, it's all a little bit too much for them. I get it.
Right. But even what you're saying about, at least for like Josiah's family or whatever, that the parents always want him to know that they loved him.
Yeah.
And I think it's good when people are in a safe space. And when you said that people may not understand everything, it's not for them to know everybody's business. But, you know, even for my biological family, my biological grandmother, she left my birth mother. So there's this whole cycle of, you know, my birth grandmother was an only child, and there was a whole cycle of people like abandoning children. Yeah. So there's always, I think it's a bit different when you hear that there's birth parents that are saying, basically, please make sure to let this child know that we wanted to do better and we love them, but we couldn't, that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah. Okay.
I what I mean? That's a whole nother sort of situation.
And I hold that so dear. It was a very emotional moment for all of us. I mean, we were all in tears, but I think for me, as I wasn't daddy yet, they hadn't yet given the yes, but it gave me what I needed in order to be able to have something to impart to him, because I was always on that page of what do I say? And I'm still there. Yes. I have that. Yes. And that's a lot.
And I was going to say, at least you have that. there are so many who never, ever had that.
Yeah.
At least you have that you can share with him. We didn't have that. And even meeting the birth biological, we still never had that. And you get to a point when there are situations like that you have to accept that there will never be closure with some things, and you have to move on with your life.
Wow. Okay. I'm going to fast forward a little bit because you've begun to talk a bit about your own journey to parenthood. And so you conceived, is that the term we use? I want to make sure I'm using correct terminology here. Would I say conceived through surrogacy? Is that the term? Please help me with this vocabulary.
No. So by the time we started the surrogacy process, my eggs had aged out.
Okay.
So we used an egg donor.
Okay.
Colin sperm. They created a blastocyst and they implanted that into the surrogate.
Okay.
So the surrogate, there's no DNA connection.
Okay.
The DNA connection is Colin to the children.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And so you said this a little bit. You did consider adoption, and based on some of the past there for you, you kind of opted out of that. And then also you wanted a baby.
Right. We went through all the foster care classes. We had a home study. We had all of that. But then Howard County, when they were like, well, there aren't any babies available, but you can have this 13-year-old that has a problem. I'm like, no.
Okay. Yeah. This is a lot to consider. You have to be prepared. And that's the thing about adoption. I always tell my clients, you have to know what you can handle. And if you can't, it's okay. Because the thing is, we want wherever the child's going to be placed, we want them to be able to stay there.
Of course.
And so we don't want there's enough transiency sometimes.
Yes. So
we want to alleviate as much of that as possible. So you have to know that. So for surrogacy, when was that? What brought you to that place?
Well, when I first got married, I wanted to have a family right away.
Okay.
Colin didn't want to.
Okay.
He didn't feel like he was ready. By the time he was ready, my doctor was just like, you're 40, your chances of conceiving are very low. I got pregnant, I miscarried. And at that point, he recommended that I use an egg donor. Because by the time you're 40, you probably have maybe a 4% at most chance of conceiving with not having fertility, without having problems.
Okay.
And I definitely did not want to go through all of those machinations and have issues. So then we chose an egg donor, and eventually we, found surrogacy in another country outside of the U.S.
And that's important to know. So outside of the U.S., why outside of the U.S.?
Because when we started the process here in the U.S., it was going to take a couple of years in Maryland to find a surrogate. It's not that easy to find local surrogates. And I felt like we're already in our 40s. We don't have that kind of time. And going abroad, I could get a surrogate within 30 days.
Okay. Wow. Within 30 days?
Within 30 days. And, with no legal hassle and all of that.
So when you went through that, because, we're talking now international, what kind of support did you have? And when I say support, how did you navigate this? What was that process for you?
Well, I navigated because I let the doctor handle everything.
Oh, your actual doctor did everything?
Abroad.
Oh.
Abroad. So I was in touch with her and in touch with the embassy. So there wasn't like a lot of navigating that you had to do. The surrogate didn't speak English, but once in a blue moon at that point, I would call and just say like little pleasantries, hello, or send a gift, that kind of thing. But really emotionally, I think that now when I think back on it, I should have probably talked to someone to help with the emotional aspect for me using an egg donor. Because I think about that now, being in an interracial or a biracial relationship, because the children look obviously more white because we used an Indian egg donor. And I'm a dark-skinned woman. woman. And so sometimes there are those thoughts that go through your own head, your own headspace, and you have to figure out a way to get out of that. I mean, and I think especially like when you see other people look at your family and they're trying to like figure out what the story is. And if you want to share, you share, but most of the time you don't share.
Right.
But I think as a woman, you want to feel as if your children are connected to you too, that you've played a central role, and that you are their mother. And I've heard other clients of mine who've used egg donors say the same thing. And I think it's important that people talk to someone. I'm not certain like what kind of therapist might be able to help, but I think it would be good for people who have used egg donors, because I hear it often, and I think most people don't. There's not a safe place for people to talk about it.
Wow. That's very eye-opening. These are just, and even with the prevalence, we'll say, of surrogacy, that is not at all, not with all the things we hear, because there's so many celebrities that do that.
Yep.
And I don't know what their circumstances, if they used egg donors.
Most of them use egg donors. A lot of them, if they're over, they use egg donors. Yeah.
This is not something that I have heard a lot of, but you said in your experience now, in particular, I guess with your own clients, you have heard this.
Yes, I've had discussions because they will call and talk to me in private, or I will even have potential clients, women who will ask, how did that affect me? They talk about it for themselves. Often they're in tears. They need to bounce it off of someone. They wonder if they're going to be able to connect with the child. All different types of things.
And we liken that. And so there is a huge similarity then with the world of adoption. And so the difference is we have in our trainings, we have bonding. And we also, because that's probably, and it's interesting. Now, I was the only, to my knowledge, if I remember correctly, the only single male in the room. Pretty much everybody else were coupled. I think there were some other male couples, but it would be women predominantly that would ask more about the bonding piece. And that gives a whole nother perspective to that kind of question. Because you know what, honestly, that never entered into my mind. Never. I just always, for me, I was like, oh, I'm just going to be in love. And I was, thank God. I saw my baby and I was just like, oh, he is mine. I am his. And this is it. But that is a very, very real, and I guess too, thinking of it in the world of surrogacy, but I forget that there are a few different kinds of means, we'll say. Wow.
And I think it comes up for men too. Well, I know it does. And I think that men, for women, they may talk about it more. Men, not necessarily, but I have had clients where the male with a sperm, they needed a sperm donor, and the same kind of questions reared their head, and they seem to take it a bit harder.
Really?
Yeah, they seem to take it a bit harder.
So what I'm hearing is, not that I thought it wasn't, but this is a lot more of an emotional process than many would even.
It's so emotional. Because by the time people get to surrogacy, there's already a lot of trauma, because you have done IVF, you've been through all these different tests, and for most people, surrogacy is the last journey. Most people think that they just don't want to have a baby. That's not what it is. 90%, 99% people, there are fertility issues. There's a health concern. There's some reason why people do it. Yes, it may be different for celebrities who cannot get out of their contracts. If they get pregnant, then they're off of a show, that type of thing. The majority of people, it's health issues, health reasons, or they've aged out or whatever.
So when one Well, so let me fast forward even more, because now I want to hedge into what you do now. So your own, so you had, now tell us first, because I didn't ask this question. How many children do you have? Now I know, but nobody else knows.
there are three. There are twins, Alec and Elle, and then there's a singleton, Mark. And Mark's 15. Alec and Elle will be 13 next week. So I'll be in a house with 3 teenagers. Imagine that.
Woo. Right. That's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
A whole lot. So, wow. Set of twins and then one single there. Do all of them have the same genetics, we'll say? Like the same egg donor for?
Well, supposedly, but I don't know. Well, Alec and Elle, obviously, because they're twins. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if it's the same for Mark. It was supposed to be.
Okay.
I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. You know, with Ancestry.com, I'm sure they'll figure that out once I'm dead.
Yeah,
I don't
everything is there.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to get all of those answers. I mean, they clearly.
But that was the intention, basically.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. I get what you're saying.
Yeah. But sometimes in these countries, you don't necessarily know. It's easy to find out, but to me, it's just like, I don't even want to bother.
Yeah. No, I get it. It's enough of an emotional roller coaster. That would just add something.
Yeah.
If you can prevent it. Yeah, I understand. Yeah. So with you going through that process, was that the catalyst or the inspiration for you then founding World of Surrogacy?
Yes, that was, because once the children were born, especially if it was the twins, BBC picked up our story. And so they filmed us in India at the clinic. And then once our story started to get around, people were contacting us. Even the doctor that we work with, she asked if we would help facilitate international couples that had questions, because at that point, surrogacy in India was booming. And there was no way that she could handle the influx. And even with the language barrier, even though she had a full staff, people still wanted to talk to someone, an American, who had really been through the process. So I became inundated with all sorts of requests. And so that's why I incorporated. It wasn't anything I thought I would initially do.
Yeah.
It just happened. It just happened. So.
Wow. So you said the BBC picked up your story when you were in India.
Yes.
And so what was the draw, do you think, that?
Well, our doctor wanted us to be on the BBC, and I'm not sure if it was because we were a biracial couple, or if I was the nice American that didn't give her a hard time. And she was just like, I want BBC, or I want them to share. You know, she asked if we would share our story with them, and we said yes. And so then I was on the BBC a few times, and then I ended up like on other shows and sharing our story.
And then, and you said, and with this, people began to call to really ask you how.
Yeah. What the process looked like, what the exit process looked like, what, questions in regards to the doctor, how the surrogates were being cared for, that kind of thing.
So when did you officially found World of Surrogacy?
Probably I want to say 2 years after Mark. Maybe more than, it may have been maybe 3 or 4, but because I was doing everything for free for a long time. And then, I didn't have WhatsApp or these other social media apps. So our phone bill, everything was just crazy. And I'm just like, we can't afford to have like $300-$400 phone bills every month. This can't. And then people were like, well, can you fly to India with us? Can you do this? And I'm just like, all right, yeah, I can fly for a price, but let me incorporate. So
tell us a bit about how this process works with World of Surrogacy. So families who are interested in surrogacy, they contact you, and then where do they go from there with you?
Generally, I find out depending on the gender, because some countries don't allow single or gay couples to pursue surrogacy. It depends on if they're an older couple, which country I will direct them to. So I generally find out if they already have embryos already created. And if they already have the embryos created, we can ship them to whatever country they plan on using the surrogate in. Or if they don't have embryos created and need an egg donor or a sperm donor, then we're able to facilitate that. And the embryologist will create blastocyst, and they will transfer that to a surrogate. And then once the surrogate gets pregnant, they go through all the checks and balances that we have here in the U.S. as well. I mean, we do have people who do surrogacy here in the U.S., but it's not as, I mean, it's very costly here. So a lot of our clients want to do it abroad. The majority of my clients are referrals from other clients who've done surrogacy over the years, or either doctors that I know that will refer them. And once a child is born, the embassy will have a doctor at the embassy. They do a swab, and that is FedEx back to the U.S. There's a genetic link, and then you receive a passport for your baby. Your baby is an American citizen, no matter what country they're born in, and then you can come home. The process is pretty quick.
Is it?
It's pretty quick abroad.
Okay.
Because we don't have, there are legal factors, but it's not all the legalities that we have here. In finding surrogates, it's a numbers game. And so they're, in the U.S., people are, more well-heeled. So you're not going to have as many people who really want to be a surrogate.
Now, what countries do you seem to do a lot more work with?
Well, right now, Mexico City, because Tbilisi, Georgia is closing down the end of this month. However, some of the surrogates will be giving birth in Armenia. So that whole Eastern Europe front, because of Putin, Ukraine shut down, and Ukraine had picked up on surrogacy when India shut down to foreigners. And then Tbilisi, they were doing a lot of surrogacy, but the end of this year, they're going to shut that down to foreigners. Guatemala does a lot of surrogacy. Czech Republic is doing surrogacy. So it's a fluid process. And so anyone in the industry has to really be aware of what's the geopolitical climate of what's happening.
And I was going to go into that. So basically, a lot of this has been dictated by what is happening, as you said, politically and socially. So you've then had to establish, tell us a bit, how did you build these relationships? I mean, this is not, I just need people to understand that you're doing a lot of international work, pretty much all for the most part.
Yes.
Not in one specific place. You've just named a few countries. So how did you build these relationships?
In India, it was easy because the children were born there. But then as I branched out in India, you make enough connections because it's a small world. I mean, you start working with different doctors and you begin to see the results. In other places, I would make sure that I have an established relationship with the embassy. I would call and let them notify them that I'm going to do business in a particular country. Is there anyone that they recommend? Or are there particular doctors where you see where babies are being born? It's that type of thing. Then once you're in that realm, you become politically connected with different people. And they make sure or steer you or introduce you to the proper doctors and the proper channels. So it's not, many people think that they can do it by themselves.
Okay.
Some can. I wouldn't recommend it.
Okay.
But if you think you're smarter than me and you know more, go for it. But it's best if you have a connection with your embassy. If you're going to do this abroad, the embassy is not going to facilitate the process for you. They're going to let you know the legal steps that you need to get that child out of the country. You really need to, if you're going to do this abroad, do it with someone who travels to those countries all the time, where you already know that babies have come out of that country.
Okay.
You can get yourself in a lot of trouble going abroad if you don't know what you're doing, because there has to be proper legal paperwork for the embassy and all of that. And often people who generally get stuck are people who thought they could handle it on their own, and then they don't have the proper legal paperwork. And so then they're stuck in these countries for a long period of time, sort of backtracking things that should have already taken place the whole time the surrogate was pregnant.
Wow.
So,
is it common to have someone who are there a lot of you around here? I guess is the question.
Internationally, no. For a long time, I was the only, I don't know of another Black woman who does this globally.
Okay.
And did surrogacy. It's the people who are in the industry, because I know a lot of people from Israel or whatever, it's a small cadre that have been in it for decades who last. Some people get in and out of it just to make a quick bit of money, and then you don't hear anything more from them. Yeah, but it's a small world, and most of the doctors globally and stuff, they know who you are. They know who you are.
Wow.
And they know, like, if you're legit or not.
And so I think you touched on something, and then we skipped off, but I don't want to skip off of that. So you're a Black woman doing this. How common is that?
Not common. Not common. I remember when I would do it in India, and the male doctors there, they were like in shock because of the patriarchy. And then on top of that, to see a Black woman coming in not even demanding respect, but they want to do business, obviously, because they want to make money.
Yeah.
And yeah, there are countries, when I would go to Tbilisi, Georgia, even India, where people have never, ever seen a Black woman in person. Ever.
Wow.
And, but it's been interesting because I feel like traveling the world, the love that I have gotten from people everywhere, to sit down and break bread with people and to hear their stories and their life and to be loved. I couldn't ask for anything more. It is a wonderful thing.
And when you say that, to be loved, now tell me a bit more. I love that. I love, I always center everything around how am I loving somebody through this and doing that. It has to be, that has to be an overwhelming thing when it comes to your clients seem so sterile, to your families. Because you have helped to facilitate a huge dream. So what is that for you?
I don't know. I get like cards and stuff all the time, especially around the holidays. And, sometimes you don't think about for me, sometimes I don't think about the impact. And people will say to me, do you know what you've done for me? And often I don't, not that it's a business, but I just don't, I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'm doing what I like.
Yeah.
I'm doing what I love. And I don't necessarily look at it that way. I kind of look at it like, well, if I wanted a family, I would have hoped I could have found someone to have in that same sort of thing. But I like it. I feel like, in a way, especially when I eat food or I go to these different restaurants that Anthony Bourdain went to, I said, man, I feel like I'm the Black Anthony Bourdain of the surrogacy world. Because it's just a wonderful thing to see the world. It is a wonderful thing to see the world, to see what women go through, what they do, how they live, all of it. I mean, I'm still in touch with our surrogate from 15 years ago.
Really?
She messages me all the time because with the money that she made, she was able to be a nurse in Israel, and she's been out of India for a long time. She goes back for holidays. Her 2 children were able to leave and have a good life. People touch each other's lives in ways that we never know. The same way my surrogate has touched my life.
Yeah.
People touch lives in ways that we can never imagine.
So it's a bond that never goes away.
It's
really.
Never gonna. I will always think of that.
So with that, have your children met the surrogate?
No, they haven't met her. Well, you know what? Mark did when he was a baby, but he doesn't remember her. And maybe one day they might. They probably will, but they're not going to have necessarily any feeling towards her anyway.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because when they were born, I was there when they were born.
Yes.
I mean, they've never talked to her or anything like that. I mean, they know that, I've told them that they had a surrogate that carried. It's interesting. The boys ask zero questions about it. Elle doesn't even ask. It's interesting because I was involved with this play that you're aware that you know about, and they want to do another play like based on to get children actors or whatever to talk about like how they might feel being born via a surrogate, which you and I were talking about sensationalism earlier, which I think that I can't speak for everyone, but for the children that I do know, including my own, it doesn't have an impact on their life.
Okay.
It's the sensationalism that somebody might want is not there. Because there's nothing sensational about it, because they don't even know. And especially if someone is abroad, surrogates abroad aren't involved in people's lives. There's no relationship.
Okay.
So the only reason for me is because I was in the business for so long and still in the business that there was a connection. 99.9% don't ever. The surrogate most of the time has never met the intended parents. None of that. So there's no relationship.
Okay. I can see that. That makes sense. It just was a different circumstance where you're concerned.
Yeah.
And so as we are kind of drawing close here, what is it that you would care to pour out to anyone on a family building journey? What is it that you would have for them?
What I would say to people, what if I had known earlier as a woman, especially because a lot of women are not marrying or they get into relationships later in life. If you think that you ever want to have a child, bank your eggs early. And even for men, bank your sperm, because you never know when you can be in a situation where, let's say, you'll need chemotherapy or what have you, and then you're not able to bank your sperm. Sort of start the process early if you think that is going to be an important factor in your life. Because what I have found out is that people who have wanted families and who have waited pretty much too late, that feeling never goes away. It never, ever leaves them. And they tell me that. And I think that that's a sad thing, to leave the world knowing that you wanted something when there are things that you can put in place. Yeah. There are things you can put in place. And if you feel like you don't even want to go that route, go the adoption route. Go the adoption route. There are companies like your company, there are people here to help you. Everyone doesn't have to do surrogacy. There are children out there too. Yeah. So that's what I would impart. I wish I had done it earlier.
That's huge. And I think what's also huge is you talking about this in particular. I always tell people this. There are two things people never get over in life: the loss of a child or not having one when that's what you wanted. And clearly we can't bring children back, but when that's something that you want, I know you and we can facilitate that. But the bigger thing here is, and you really said it, do it. Put something in place. If you know that's what you want, because again, you'll never get past it. You will never, ever. This is huge. It's so different than we go to school, we get these degrees and these things, and most of us do not use any of that. And we're fine. We think at that point we want to do that, and we might have done it for a little bit. We loved it. It was great. But we move on, we do other things. But it's so different when it comes to having children. That's in a league of its own.
Yep. You have to put some skin in the game. You can't necessarily, be so reliant on on others. You have to put some skin in the game, and there is help, and put some skin in the game if that's what you want.
Mm-hmm.
If that's what you want, and especially women, because I feel like, and especially women of color, because a lot of doctors don't give people sound advice, and especially women. Bank your eggs. People are often worried about the cost. You know what? If it's not cost effective here, contact someone that goes to another country, and go to another country and bank your eggs. It's a lot cheaper. But if you want a family, do something. Do something about it.
Yeah.
Don't wait and call me when you're 70 years old and you're upset.
Please don't do that. just no. No, I love it. Well, I can't thank you enough for this time. Yes, we are family, but you have poured out in ways that you really can't even imagine. I can't thank you enough for your openness, for your vulnerability. It really has meant a lot to me personally, but I also know above and beyond this, what impact that it will have for others, because your story covers a lot. It's not one-dimensional at all. It's not even two-dimensional. It's got a few dimensions to it. And what you shared will impact people. And maybe, who knows, they've contacted you about surrogacy. So who knows what someone will then reach out to you for based on your lived experience.
Thank you so much, David, for having me. It's always a safe place with you. And I am so proud of you. And I'm so happy that you have Josiah, that you are the father. You're a great father.
Thank you.
You're a great father.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, my friends, as it is my custom, I thank you all for joining us today. I hope that you have gotten something today, that something has inspired you, that something has moved in you to really, as Crystal said, act, move. Don't wait. When it comes to becoming parents, that's what you want to do. Crystal said, put some skin in the game, make it happen. As it is my custom, I will sign. Oh, I'm signing off too early. I forgot my other part. If you want further information on Crystal Travis and World of Surrogacy, her information will be in the description of this video. Please check her out. She has moved internationally and is doing great things. So clearly, this is not the person who does not know what they're doing. So her information will be in the bio. Follow Josiah on all social media platforms. If you need either one of us, you can reach out to us. As it is my custom, always remember, adoption changes lives and brings worlds together. Thank you so much for joining us. I will see you, or talk to you rather, the same time, same place next Friday. Talk to you soon. Bye.